The war had dragged for 97 cycles. Across the stars, empires bled each other dry while claiming moral superiority and technological enlightenment. The High Coalition deployed thought-weavers, logic engines, and predictive war simulators. The Syndicate of Purity retaliated with entropy blasters, neural suppressors, and hypercausal drones. Neither side budged. Every battle became a mathematical certainty. Every tactic countered before it was executed. Planets became graveyards. Civilization stagnated under war economies. Entire species forgot what peace felt like. Hope calcified into doctrine. Progress vanished beneath bureaucracy. The galaxy teetered on the edge of collapse, not from destruction, but from fatigue. The Central Concord met in silence, not out of respect but despair. Their polished minds offered no new solutions. Simulations had run out of parameters. Peace negotiations failed not from pride, but irrelevance. No one remembered how to stop. They hadn't won in decades. They hadn't lost either. Just endured. Slowly. Painfully. One counselor spoke what the others dared not. It was not a question but a statement, delivered with finality. That's enough. The others stared, not in disagreement, but in fear. They all knew what came next. The phrase was forbidden in official transcripts. The subject, buried in cautionary doctrines. One name they never voiced, for fear it might listen. They voted unanimously. Quietly. The transmission was dispatched from the galactic core to the isolated coordinates of Sol 3. It wasn't diplomatic. It was a summoning. A submission. Humanity hadn't been part of the war. They were deliberately excluded. Their potential was labeled too volatile. Their instincts too unstructured. Their history, a record of chaos, rebellion, and total war, stood in contrast to every interstellar protocol. They weren't just unorthodox, they were the antithesis of control. When first contact was made, humans weren't invited to councils or trade networks. They were observed, then quarantined, not for their safety, but everyone else's. Even in isolation, humanity thrived. While the galaxy debated moral codes, humans transcended energy limitations. While other species perfected governance, humans built ships that ignored gravity. While others theorized nonviolence, humanity mastered orbital railguns and nanite-assisted battlefield medicine. They weren't elegant. They weren't refined. But they were fast. And they learned from pain. No one asked if humans would accept. They didn't negotiate terms. The Concord didn't offer money, territory, or power. They sent only one message: the coordinates of the front. It was a declaration, not a request. A plea dressed in formality. A signal of surrender disguised as command. Humanity responded with silence. Then came movement. Not from high command. There was no centralized authority. Orders weren't needed. Across Earth's orbital ring, carriers unlatched from magnetic docks. Armor was sealed in silence. Weapons, old, worn, proven, were chosen without fanfare. Units mobilized not as battalions, but as syndicates of purpose. No names. No broadcasted goals. No slogans. They deployed without ceremony, without witness, and without explanation. The Concord watched. Not in arrogance, but anxiety. They remembered the Terran Exodus, the moment humanity colonized 5 systems in under 10 years by ignoring every logistical law known. They remembered the Orion Treaty collapse, when humans abandoned alliances over a single word in a document. They remembered the first time a human ship destroyed a cruiser 3 times its size, using only a heat signature and a timing algorithm. Now, the gates were opening again. But this time, not in protest or exploration. This time, it was an answer to a summons. No one cheered. There were no celebrations. Only silence. The Concord logged the time and date. They began emergency evacuations of diplomatic stations near the war front, not because of enemy threat, but in anticipation of what they had invited. No one knew how many would arrive. No one knew their plan. There would be no broadcasts, no press releases. Just results. And for the first time in a century, the war's outcome was no longer a calculation. It became a countdown. They arrived without warning. No diplomatic vessels. No heralds. No signatures of intent. The detection arrays registered sudden gravitational anomalies, followed by cold, deliberate insertions into contested systems. The crafts weren't sleek or polished. They were scarred, functional, efficient in the way a guillotine is. Their hulls bore no insignias, only deep, charred streaks of previous engagements. And they didn't descend, they dropped, piercing atmospheres like they were tearing through excuses. Alien forces scrambled to intercept. Protocol dictated interception, containment, interrogation. But before any could be carried out, human deployment began. Landing modules slammed into surfaces with brutal precision. Troop clusters dispersed into terrain with a speed that defied sensor logic. There were no speeches, no transmissions. They moved like a virus, not seeking terrain control, taking it. Observers tried to record them. The footage came back fragmented. Not from jamming, but from systems failing to process what they saw. The movements were too fast, too fluid. Human soldiers didn't march in formations. They flowed. Their armor wasn't pristine. It looked used. Battle-worn. Modified with layers of individual preference and field repair. Some carried weapons unknown to any galactic database. Others wielded standard arms in ways no combat AI could predict. They didn't speak to local forces. They didn't coordinate with allied units. They simply identified weak points, breached them, and moved forward. Within hours, entire sectors collapsed. Not from overwhelming firepower, but from the sheer refusal of humans to pause. They didn't fortify. They didn't wait for orders. They calculated on the move, adapted before the situation finished changing. The first reaction among the alien ranks was confusion. The second was dread. Reports began filtering in, not from generals, but terrified lieutenants. Engagement zones fell silent minutes after human entry. Command posts found their feeds severed not by signal disruption, but by systematic infiltration. They weren't being overrun. They were being outmaneuvered in ways their war models had never accounted for. Captured drones showed patterns of human tactics that made no statistical sense. Units split into threes, doubled back, emerged from angles no gravitational logic supported. They used terrain not just for cover but for manipulation. Enemy forces were pulled into crossfire zones that hadn't existed moments before. Not one strategy was repeated. Every encounter was different. Adaptive. Ruthless. And yet they weren't mindless. Civilians were ignored. Infrastructure that wasn't tactically critical was left untouched. In some cases, human units repaired local systems after clearing an area, using unfamiliar tools and techniques that left observers questioning whether they were soldiers or engineers. They operated with terrifying precision, but not cruelty. At least, not yet. An intercepted message, brief, encoded, was traced to one human unit. No wasted motion. No wasted time. That became the unofficial motto passed between alien units trying to comprehend what they were facing. Analysts debated their command structure. No hierarchy was found. Orders didn't come from above. They originated within squads, adapted in seconds, decisions executed without hesitation. This lack of centralized control defied every established military doctrine. Alien commanders attempted to open communication lines. Messages were sent in over 50 galactic dialects. None received a reply. Not even rejection. Just silence. Requests were treated as background noise. No diplomatic channels were acknowledged. No attempt was made to explain or justify. The humans didn't need understanding. They needed results. Entire alien battalions withdrew before contact, spooked by vague reports of a single human recon unit disabling a fortress without casualties. Rumors spread faster than facts. Fear overtook discipline. Propaganda efforts backfired. The more they tried to frame humans as reckless, the more their own soldiers viewed them as inevitable. One observation stood out in every post-engagement analysis. Humans didn't celebrate victories. They didn't plant flags. They didn't pause to mark territory. They moved on as if success was the default, and anything less didn't exist. The war, for them, wasn't a campaign. It was a job. And they had just begun. Front lines began to vanish. Not shift, vanish. Grid maps turned obsolete overnight as human forces bypassed conventional paths entirely. They didn't just fight the enemy, they dismantled their methods. Infiltration units composed of 4 or 5 operators would breach fortified compounds designed to withstand entire regiments. Surveillance showed no siege, no artillery, no prolonged engagement. Just abrupt silence, then human identifiers moving freely inside enemy command centers. Alien analysts struggled to classify the tactics. Human behavior defied every predictive model. They weaponized unpredictability. One moment they deployed cloaked, silent drones using biosignal tracking. The next, they walked in openly, unarmored, carrying nothing but field-forged disruptors. No pattern repeated. Every maneuver was original, shaped by terrain, opponent behavior, or seemingly nothing at all. They anticipated countermeasures before they were used, then turned them against their creators. Entire defense networks collapsed from internal sabotage without any sign of breach. Human operatives bypassed firewalls not with superior tech, but through intuition. They reverse-engineered alien code on the battlefield using improvised interfaces. In one instance, a communications tower broadcasting encrypted signals was hijacked using a stripped-down human music player. The message inserted? White noise. The effect? Enemy coordination fractured within minutes. Psychological tactics escalated in ways no protocol could prepare for. Alien soldiers found decoy bodies set in precise poses, as if staring at them. Entire squads reported phantom movements, figures vanishing before they could confirm contact. Automated sentries were overridden and repurposed as guardians of human extraction zones. Enemy barracks awoke to find their food stores replaced with messages written in their own language. You're already beaten. Leave. Humans didn't need numbers. They needed opportunity. One engineer was recorded converting a mining laser into an anti-armor weapon using 3 pieces of scrap, thermal tape, and a belt buckle. Another hijacked a weather control station, redirecting an artificial storm onto an advancing enemy fleet. Tactical advantage wasn't granted, it was taken, twisted, and turned lethal. Efforts to monitor their progress failed. Thermal signatures were masked. Movement detectors returned false positives. Optical feeds were corrupted with recursive loops of enemy unit deaths edited in reverse. Not only did humans control the battlefield, they distorted its perception. The enemy didn't just lose control of territory. They lost trust in their senses. Fear began to crack military structures. Lower-ranking officers hesitated to engage. Mid-command structures demanded relocation to avoid proximity to zones under Terran influence. Morale dipped below sustainability. Orders were questioned. Patrols turned into retreats. Generals abandoned posts after witnessing a single drone painted with the words, "This isn't personal. You're in the way, The few captured humans didn't reveal intelligence. They didn't plead or resist. They simply observed, silent and calm, as if already calculating how to escape. And they always did, somehow. Cells were found empty, locks untouched, security footage erased frame by frame. One prisoner reportedly left a message carved into the wall, "This was a test. You failed, Allied alien forces, initially supportive, grew uneasy. Joint operations were declined without explanation. Human units operated independently, delivering results far beyond projections, but offering no insight into their methods. There was no transparency. Only outcomes. Allies began requesting redeployment away from Terran detachments, citing operational incompatibility. In truth, it was fear. A species that could win every engagement without centralized control, without hesitation, and without visible effort, wasn't an ally. It was a reminder of inadequacy. Command centers analyzed over 1,000 data logs. No cohesion. No structure. But one universal trait emerged. Adaptation. Every failure became an upgrade. Every obstacle a tool. They learned in real time, sometimes during engagements. No wasted movements. No redundant strategies. Just evolution, fight by fight, move by move. The war was no longer symmetrical. Not even comparable. The enemy still fought by rules. The humans by necessity. There were no declarations. No escalations. No dramatic ultimatums. Just one quiet, consistent result. Territory taken, resistance scattered, and systems falling apart at the seams. And the terrifying part was this: it hadn't been aggression. It was efficiency. It started with a silence that felt wrong. A human unit failed to check in, unusual, but not unprecedented. Delays happened. Operations extended. But 20 minutes passed. Then 40. Then 2 hours. No extraction. No signal. No trace. The squad had entered a controlled zone held by a minor syndicate faction known for cowardice and unreliable allegiance. When the final audio clip surfaced, it was corrupted, static overlaying fragmented screams, followed by a single human voice. Asterisk. Request denied. Asterisk. They had been captured. The news didn't trigger panic among human ranks. There were no emotional broadcasts. No mourning. Just movement. No orders were given. Yet within an hour, multiple units redirected toward the same sector. Not with haste, but with a cold, coordinated certainty that unsettled even their own observers. Enemy forces holding the area received a sudden blackout. Power grids shut down. Communications died. Artificial light vanished. Surveillance systems looped uselessly. Attempts to reactivate defensive platforms failed. Core nodes had been erased from the network. Not destroyed. Deleted surgically. Moments later, a mist rolled across the perimeter, unnatural, odorless, carrying electromagnetic distortion. Units stationed outside tried to intervene, but by the time reinforcements arrived, the compound was gone. Not destroyed. Gone. Buildings reduced to outline impressions. Equipment rusted mid-function. No bodies. No gunfire. No indication of combat. Just absence, left in geometrically precise destruction patterns, as if someone had removed the sector from existence. The only thing left behind was a transmission beacon, slowly blinking. When activated, it played a short phrase in every galactic dialect simultaneously. Asterisk. This was restraint. Asterisk. The effect was immediate. Syndicate leadership demanded explanations from their regional commanders, who responded by resigning en masse. Troops abandoned forward positions. Some went rogue, attempting to defect. Others initiated surrender protocols to any nearby human unit, regardless of conditions. One fleet opened fire on its own command vessel after discovering it had authorized the torture of captured humans. Loyalty collapsed. Alliances cracked. Factions began preemptively disbanding, fearing they were next. Human presence increased, not in number, but in perception. They were never seen, only felt. Drones stopped responding. Outposts found their ammo stores replaced with recorded laughter. Vehicles malfunctioned seconds after engines ignited, only to work perfectly again the next day. It wasn't sabotage. It was demonstration. The Concord tried to intervene, offering apologies, concessions, even reparations for the incident. No reply came. Instead, reports surfaced of human infiltration into sectors that weren't active conflict zones. Not to attack, but to watch. Dozens of command staff awoke to find their private systems breached, not for data theft, but to leave a single file open, images of what had happened to the compound. The message wasn't revenge. It was warning. A whisper took hold in war rooms, passed like a contagion. Asterisk. They're not angry. They're focused. Asterisk. The difference mattered. Anger was emotional. Focus was intentional. Anger burned out. Focus endured. Alien command protocols began rewriting themselves. Entire battle doctrines were abandoned. Fronts were redrawn away from human influence. Enemy factions once confident in numbers now refused to operate at night. Rumors spread that humans had turned stars dark in retaliation. Absurd, but no one was willing to test it. A single intercepted message circulated widely within both Allied and enemy networks. Asterisk. Your war is inefficient. You've been given notice. Asterisk. No origin. No metadata. But it spread, unchecked, like a final judgment. Leadership councils stopped issuing orders. They issued requests. Entire colonies began self-demilitarization just to avoid drawing attention. Intelligence agencies collapsed from internal mutiny, operatives refusing to act on missions that could provoke a Terran response. Veterans began speaking of humans not as soldiers, but as phenomena, unavoidable, unrelenting, unsympathetic. The terrifying realization settled like ash across the stars. Humans had been holding back. What they'd done wasn't vengeance. It wasn't escalation. It was balance restored, using methods no other species could replicate or survive. Not out of bloodlust. Out of principle. The rules had been broken. Correction was required. And the galaxy had just been reminded who enforced it. The war didn't end with a battle. It ended with nothing. No final push, no signature offensive, no demand for surrender. Human operations simply ceased. Not abruptly, not entirely, just enough to be noticed. Engagements dwindled without explanation. No new incursions. No audible retreat. Units pulled back, not in retreat, but as if the task had been completed. The front collapsed without a shot. Enemy systems continued running, but nobody manned them. Entire fleets remained in orbit, unmanned, drifting like relics. Alien commanders waited for the catch. There was none. Intelligence teams scoured for signals, but found only static. Analysts expected a trap, retaliation, or annexation. Instead, silence. Human units disbanded in real time. Equipment was dismantled and buried. Facilities vacated. No structures claimed. No resources extracted. No territories marked. They didn't stay. They didn't even look back. One by one, human ships departed. The routes were unpredictable, unregistered, and unescorted. No formations. No farewells. Just quiet exits. Not a single message was sent to explain. No justification, no debriefing, no ceremony. Systems once consumed by fire were now quiet, except for one thing: order. Infrastructure repaired. Civilians unharmed. Essential systems left functioning better than before. It wasn't conquest. It wasn't diplomacy. It was closure. The Concord gathered for the first time in weeks. Not to discuss strategy, but aftermath. For the first time in recorded history, all factions in a major war agreed unanimously. Not by treaty. By shared caution. Documents weren't signed. Protocols weren't established. They simply stopped fighting. As if human withdrawal had triggered something deeper than fear, shame. Across the former conflict zones, messages were discovered, etched into walls, scrawled on scraps, burned into consoles. Not threats. Not claims. Just one phrase, asterisk. Don't call us again. Asterisk. It wasn't a warning. It was a decision. Alien societies began restructuring. War industries dissolved overnight. Propaganda wings dismantled themselves. Public forums, once filled with calls for vengeance, fell silent. Schools updated historical records. Human involvement was summarized in a single entry: operational exposure, minimum duration, maximum impact. Entire courses were built around the phenomenon, not to explain it, but to avoid repeating it. Within syndicate space, statues were quietly removed. Memorials erected for the disappeared. Leaders resigned before inquiries could begin. Regions that once cheered for expansion fell into silence. Not from loss, but comprehension. They hadn't been defeated militarily. They had been weighed, judged, and found not worth the effort of further engagement. A recovered recording from a syndicate officer detailed a rare sighting: a lone human operator standing atop a ridge, watching evacuation ships depart. The figure didn't move. Didn't raise a weapon. Just observed. Then turned and vanished. The implication was clear: humanity never intended to stay. Their presence wasn't about power. It was intervention. Temporary, necessary, and absolute. Even among allies, the tone shifted. Celebrations were muted. Credit was avoided. No species claimed strategic superiority. Everyone knew the truth: had humans not intervened, the war would still be dragging on. But no one dared suggest inviting them again. Once was enough. Research archives noted changes in communication protocols. Jokes about humans disappeared. The once dismissive term, primitive tacticians, was erased from official documentation. The very way galactic civilizations approached conflict transformed. Simulation algorithms were rebuilt from scratch. Not to emulate human tactics, but to compensate for the inability to predict them. And Earth? It offered no statement. No official commentary. It didn't capitalize on fear. It didn't open negotiations. It simply returned to orbit. Quiet. Unbothered. Disinterested in praise or punishment. From a distance, it appeared unchanged. But across the stars, its shadow remained. Children born after the war grew up hearing stories of silent operations, impossible victories, and quiet departures. Most dismissed them as myth. But every commander who'd witnessed it firsthand carried one memory: that humans hadn't come to dominate. They came to correct. And when they left behind no empire, no rule, no scar, only a universal understanding. When all else fails, and the galaxy spirals into chaos beyond reason or repair, that's enough. Send in the humans.